types. What were the 4 types? Thinking, feeling, sensing, intuiting. Fire, earth, air, water. He got it from the Greeks, and he knew that he got it from the Greeks in their formation of astrological symbolism of the 4 types of the 4 elements in astrology: fire, earth, air, water. But when we look at a chart, the first thing we need to acknowledge is that every planet needs to be seen or heard or to be expressed. The second thing is that we look to the moon as a basic matrix, good word matrix, because it means matter and or mother, that the matrix is what holds us. And the moon shows what we need to hold us. It shows what we need to hold other people. And so the moon becomes, in building any relationship story about what are your needs, that's where we start, is with the moon. However, then we jump to Venus and Mars, because as many of us know, Venus and Mars were the cosmic lovers. And so we'll come back to Venus and Mars in a bit more depth. But the thing is that what we need in a relationship expresses in our chart through our natal appearance, through our birth. Venus and the moon are the ones that are the yin energies. I would use the word feminine, but it doesn't quite cut it anymore. But it is the receptive, and in some ways it is the moon and Venus that expresses the needs, the moon, and the desires, the Venus. Venus is what we like. We'll come back to that in a bit too. But I want to start off and spend a little bit of time talking about relationship dynamics. And it's my sense, and although I'm a practicing astrologer, I have a degree in psychology. I've never been a practicing licensed therapist, but if there's something that exists in the world of depth psychology, chances are I've read it and read their teachers and their students, and so I know what I'm talking about in this area. But I want to spend just a little bit on the string of Freud to Jung to Wilhelm Reich, and most of you probably recognize at least 2 of these three names. How many people have recognized the name Wilhelm Reich, just out of curiosity? Okay, you know how we hear about this big feud that was between Freud and Jung, and how Jung... Okay, that feud was absolutely bullshit. It was nothing. It was nothing. The real feud, or it was more than a feud, was that Sigmund Freud picked Wilhelm Reich to be his successor in running the School of Psychoanalytics in Vienna, and as soon as Reich began to lecture, Freud kicked him out. And this was the big deal. It was not, Jung was never bought into Freud. He was a student there, but he was already doing what he was doing, and it developed much deeper and wider. And certainly there was a philosophical rift, but it was nothing compared to Reich. The point is, though, that in order to understand the astrology of relationships, we need to understand a little bit about the psychodynamics of relationships. And really it was Freud who created the language. And I know that for many people, Freud is disgusting and politically incorrect and hung up on sexuality and a misogynist and comes out of that period of time of the early 20th century in Germany, where there are so many things that were wrong with that culture that Freud was part of. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there's not as many things wrong with our culture, just to be clear. And it was Jung who took Freud, in effect, a step further, deeper, wider. But it was Wilhelm Reich who basically disagreed with Freud on an absolute basis. And I jumped the gun here because I want to say that when we use modern language to describe relationships, we're leaning on terms, and even not just relationships, just our modern life. We use words like, oh, my ego, or getting beyond my ego, or, oh, he was projecting. I mean, these are words that Freud defined. Words like projection and even the word illusion, which is a great, Freud, the last book he wrote before he died was a book called The Future of an Illusion. It's about religion. But the point here is that we can't just skip over Freud, and I'm not going to say a lot more about his work today, but he set the stage. He opened the door through his first book, The Interpretation of Dreams, written in the 1890s when there was a once every 400-year conjunction of Neptune, the planet of dreams, and Pluto, the planet of depth, coming up to the surface. But it was Jung who took it a step further and went into the collective unconscious and into realms that Freud just was too anal, restricted. And by the way, even the word anal like that, these are Freudian terms having to do with, with our psychosexual development. And again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much further, but if you had 3 or 4 hours, I could probably blow your mind a few times, but we're not going there. Reich, however, disagreed with Freud on some absolutely basic assumptions. Freud, the next to last book that he wrote before he died was called Civilization and Its Discontent. And it was basically a book about how the more civilized we became, the more neurotic we became, because neurosis was a untruth that was at the basis of what we weren't expressing. And that Freud believed that as we became more civilized, we had to pay more attention to what the cultural taboos were. And this was a big thing about Freud's work also. But the point here is that Freud believed that a neurosis through years of therapy. And remember, when you went into psychoanalysis, you didn't go to a therapist once a week for 6 months or a year. You went to a therapist 4 times a week for about 5 or 6 years or so. That was what the Freudian analytical therapy process was. So, we are total wimps when it comes to engaging in that therapeutic process. But Freud absolutely believed, it was basic to his whole work, that neurosis was not curable, it was just manageable, and that therapy taught us to manage our neuroses. Therapy is basically going back and finding the untruths in our life that we've built these illusions on. But an illusion, according to Freud, isn't wrong. An illusion is just something based on a wish fulfillment. Some of the greatest inventions and breakthroughs in humanity have been someone's illusion or dream. A dream is a wish your heart makes. So it doesn't mean that an illusion is wrong. It just means that it's based upon a wish fulfillment and it may or may not become manifest. Wilhelm Reich comes along and says, I disagree with you, Dr. Freud. Neurosis can be cured and its origin is sexuality. See, again, we could do a really deep dive here, but the important things is Wilhelm Reich, when he was a medical doctor, he was on the field for the German army as a medic in World War I, and Freud was the cool guy to study with at that time. It was like in the 60s doing acid, in the 1910s and 20s, you studied psychotherapy or you went into Jungian analysis. And Reich, while he was studying Freud, was also reading Karl Marx. And Reich basically, and again, he was coming to his own during the late 20s and 30s. And the first book that he wrote was called The Psychology of Mass Fascism. Second book he wrote was called The Function of the Orgasm. And Wilhelm Reich's belief was that we as a Western society had no clue as to what an orgasm was, and neither did Freud, because they were focused genitally. And that a true orgasm was experienced in every cell of the body. Now understand, he didn't have any Eastern mythology. He didn't know about Kundalini or Chi or Ki or an enlightening, a Kundalini rising experience. He was framing all of this from a Western metaphor, but he understood and knew that what we had as an orgasm wasn't a real orgasm. It was very, very limited because of our whole way in which we carried our bodies and so on. But Wilhelm Reich developed a therapy that is not a gentle therapy, and it's a combination of physical medicine and physical what's the word, manipulation and breathing and psychotherapy. And then he developed these tools, to focus what he called orgone energy. And this was, and again, I don't want to go down the Reich rabbit hole too far, but we got to understand that the whole Freudian philosophy of neurosis is incurable is bullshit. That there is something that is called enlightenment or awareness that is available to us. But unlike how many people think, it's not just oh, that person's enlightened. Enlightenment is something you need to do every moment of your life, and it takes work every moment of your life. So it's not like, oh, I got it, I'm done. Anyhow, Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. This has particular reference or relevance in an environment like the Conscious Life Expo, I think. Now, I'm not going to point any fingers here, but I think it's very important that it's not by the imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This astrologically is Pluto. Pluto, Hades. Hades, Greek for the underworld, the hell realms. Hades, Pluto, is the lord of the underworld. The underworld is certainly everything underground. It's immense wealth. We live in a plutocracy governed by the immensely wealthy, not the rich, but the immensely wealthy. Ancient times, if you owned what was under the ground, you were immensely wealthy because that was gold, silver, copper, tin, I'm missing things, diamonds. These were all things that were underground. However, in the modern world, Pluto is everything that's metaphysically underground. It is our unconscious. Everything that we're not aware of on the surface is in the realms of Pluto. And there's a story that, again, I could do an hour and a half talk on the story of Pluto. Well, actually, the story was originally Hades, the Greek version of Pluto, which is Latin or Roman. Hades came to the home of Ceres, who was actually a full-fledged Olympian goddess, and Ceres was the goddess of the fruit and the grain. In fact, the word cereal comes from Ceres. And Ceres' daughter was like a Venus in training. She was a virginal princess to become a queen, but she lived at home with mom, and she was beautiful, and she was in training to be the queen. And Pluto comes along and Hades comes along and abducts her, takes her into the underworld. Mom freaks out. The earth goes barren. There's no food. And then Ceres goes to Jupiter, the king of Mount Olympus, and says, "Hey, Pluto's got my daughter. You need to go get her." And Jupiter goes, "I can't go into the underworld. The river Styx. If I go across it, I lose my identity." He goes, "But I can send Mercury." Because Mercury's job, his first job, was the psychopomp. Mercury goes back and forth between this world and other worlds. He's the guide of souls in their journey to and from the underworld. Mercury has no problem. Goes into the underworld, doesn't lose his identity. Actually, Mercury doesn't lose their identity because Mercury is neither male nor female. Or Mercury is actually hermaphroditic, so he's both male and he, they, she are both male and female. I get pronoun challenged, like many of us. Anyhow, Mercury works out, he's the shuttle diplomat. He works out the deal that Persephone is released to the mom 6 months a year, and then she goes back and serves as Pluto's queen of the underworld for 6 months a year. And I have to be careful what I'm saying here right now, because in no way, shape, or form would I ever condone someone, God or human, transgressing someone else's boundaries. And there's no question, Pluto took this gorgeous young princess into the underworld and raped her and made her queen. On the other hand, she got the ultimate bad boy. And again, I'm not saying that it's a right thing, so I'm treading on seriously careful ground. But um, it may not have been ultimately such a bad thing for her, other than the beginning of it was horrific and terrible. Regardless, she was the queen of the underworld. It's like being at home and one day the limousine, the black limousine comes by, as James Dean or Mick Jagger or whoever gets you going from whatever, world you live in, because that's kind of what happened. Anyhow, it's the process, though, of Mercury going into the underworld and making things appear here on the surface. And I just want to complete a circle before we move on. This is what talk therapy is. Mercury is talk. We send Mercury into our unconscious. We talk about it in a way that's relaxed with the therapist. We forget we have boundaries. The shit comes out, and then we get to deal with it. Are you with me here? Okay. All right. So primary relationship dynamics. Shima or someone out there, what time am I supposed to end? 5:30. Okay. We got way too much to deal with. I have way too much to deal with. So if we hit some slides and I go, we just skipped that, it's okay. So primary relationship dynamics. Things that we need to talk about are shadow work, repression, suppression, and projection. 3 out of 4 of those words are specifically Freudian terms. Repression, suppression, and projection. Here's the short lesson on this. Suppression and or repression result in projection. Suppression and repression are absolutely different things, and people use them the same and mix them up all the time. Oh, I know I do that. I repress it all the time. No, you don't. If you know you do it, you don't repress it. You suppress it, because suppression is conscious. It's that best friend that you've known for 30 years, and you can say to that person, sometimes when you meet someone new and you do this and you do that, you're just a real asshole. And the person goes, no, I'm not. And you just, it's something that's so basic and everyone sees it, but it's invisible. Repression is based upon unconscious. People can't say, oh yeah, I've worked a lot of stuff out and I know my unconscious. No, you don't. You know what parts of your unconscious you've made conscious. But the unconscious is repression, and you don't know you're doing it. But here's the thing. Whether you suppress it or repress it, the planet needs to be seen or heard. So it comes out. How does it come out? I hate the fact that I'm blah, 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 and I'm not going to acknowledge it. So I meet people out there that are blah, 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 and I go, I hate you. When you're with someone and whatever they say or do seems to be more energetic than the moment entails, it can be someone yelling at a waiter or waitress for something that just a little minor thing. This is projection. Projection basically is internal stuff that has no way of expressing, and it pops out in a relationship. It doesn't matter whether you do it consciously or unconsciously, the result is projection. And this whole thing, because it's invisible, this is what we call shadow work. It's the delving into the subconscious, into the unconscious. And this is the key to relationship work. In astrology, there are 2 basic forces of resistance or holding energy back. There's compression. Think of this as a conjunction. 2 planets in the same place, compressing their energy into the same place. It may work or it may not work. If it's Venus and Jupiter, it probably works really well unless you're overindulging, and then it may not work, but it's easy. If it's Saturn and Mars, it may be a lot more difficult to work that out because their energies are hot, cold, and so different. But that's compression. If you have those same 2 planets in opposition, that's a tug of war. You're in the middle, and that's tension. Tension and compression are opposite forces, even though we tend to interchange them like suppression and repression. We go, oh yeah, that was really tense. No, it wasn't. It was really compressive. Tension is what is the outward movement, and so the thing is that a tug of war is tension. And when we have 2 planets in opposition, that is the primary tension that can be set up in a chart or in our lives. And when we're in the middle, when I was going to walk, I won't. When we're in the middle, we can only look at one planet at a time. Let's go back to that the Saturn-Mars opposition. So I'm born with Saturn and Mars kind of like in full moon position. They're totally 180 degrees apart. I look at Saturn, I can't see Mars. I look at Mars, I can't see Saturn. What happens is that I look at both of them in my chart and I go, wow, I really like my Mars. My Mars is in Sagittarius and that's a lot of fun. I'm going to look at Mars and my Saturn is in Gemini. It becomes invisible. It's repressed. Or I might say, I don't like that part of me that really like studies really hard and kind of follows through on getting a lot of information, and I'm not going to go there, I'm going to go to the party instead. That's suppression. I'm aware that I'm going here, not there. Doesn't matter. Whichever tool I use to shut down the planet I'm not looking at then pops back up in my life as a projection. I had a client once who I only saw 3 times over a period of about 15 years. First time I saw her, she had been married, married for I think about 8 or 9 years, and one day she came home from work and there was a note on the refrigerator, I can't take it anymore, I'm out of here. His stuff was gone and he was gone. Really, like that suddenly. About 4 or 5 years later, same thing happened. It wasn't on the refrigerator. It was, an email that was written to her outlining why he had left. This woman had Sun in her chart opposed Uranus. Uranus, you might recognize, is the planet of sudden breaks, lightning striking, unexpected stuff happening that normally comes from things that are hidden, suppressed, repressed, but they're out of the way. And I told this woman the first time I saw her, and then the second time I told her again, and I told her I would not tell her again. And she came back the third time, maybe another 7 or 8 years later, saying, I got this one nailed. I got this one wired. And basically what I told her is until you get a whole lot weirder, until you loosen up and figure out a way to be the rebel that you hate in everyone else and yet you're attracted to because you find it fascinating, you're going to have one person after another just abruptly leave you because they're not leaving you. You've invited them in to remind you that you're expressing your Uranus opposed the Sun that way. You understand what I'm saying? This is a classic case of projection. Now, here's the bad news. We all do this. Every one of us. Every relationship has an element of that part of ourselves that we project. And again, what is repressed or suppressed is projected. So I think I've covered this enough. I have the slide. I'll say a couple words. When I talk about relationships, again, I'm talking about all relationships. Anything from the inner to the outer is a relationship. There are parental, children, family, cousins, work equals, bosses, employees, lovers, friends, sometimes they're the same, marriage partners, sometimes they're none of those. No, but all kinds of variations really are what we're talking about here. And the role of the astrologer here is not to judge one kind of relationship or another, or to put their belief about how a relationship should be. The role of the astrologer is to understand and to help explain the dynamics. This is your mind on astrology. It's simply to open up the perspective so that dynamics can be seen. Projection is the ultimate thing, though, that creates relationships. Even the best, a 50-year marriage where the two people love each other still after 50 years, doesn't matter. There's still an element of projection. It's part of the glue that keeps it together. I love this cartoon. This one snail is saying to another, I don't care if she's a tape dispenser. I love her. Projection. Jung called this his shadow work. He said we never see others. By the way, this is the guy who wrote the Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk. I never can say his name. Palahniuk. He wrote, Carl Jung called this his shadow work. He said, we never see others. Instead, we see only aspects of ourselves that fall over them, shadows, projections, our associations. I think of Anais Nin, who was a lover of Henry Miller, the guy who wrote Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn and all those banned books. And she wrote a lot of erotic literature back in the 1930s, 40s. She wrote a book called Delta, The Delta of Venus. Go there. But she wrote, "We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are." Okay. So Thomas More, the guy who wrote all the soul books, The Reenchantment of Soul and Everyday Life and Soulmates and all of those books, who also, by the way, his second but not widely published book is a book called The Planets Within, The Astrological Psychology of Marsilio Ficino, who was the 15th century astrologer to 3 generations of Medicis at the height of the Renaissance. So, but this Thomas More, the same guy, the modern Thomas More that many of us know, wrote, "We begin to see relationship as the place where soul works out its destiny." He goes on to say, if we want to see the soul interrelationship, we have to look beyond our intentions and expectations. So the deal is here that a relationship has, well, more than 2 levels, but there's two facets I want to talk about. And I want to connect this to like William Blake's concept of innocence and experience. Because when we meet someone, there's something that can be called new relationship energy, infatuation. It's like you meet someone and that first day or week or month or years can just be this kind of like feeding frenzy, and then it settles into something else. And in a way, I have this theory that I call relationship as hall tree. And a hall tree, you go into New England, and where it's cold outside and snowy and wet in the winter, most homes have like a vestibule area where they have what they call a hall tree. It's like a coat rack, but they're all shaped differently because originally they were made out of just trees that would just have branches that you would hang your wet and cold stuff on before you went into the house. The thing is that we are all like hall trees, and we all carry with us, though, emotional baggage. And that emotional baggage is kind of like clothing. And when we meet someone whose hooks and arms and twigs on their trunk have the same shape as our emotional baggage, we hang it on them. Now, I'm not saying we do this consciously, but this is the feeding frenzy of like, oh, you grew up in a in a cult, in a home with a cult religion. So did I. I hang that on you. You hang it on me. Oh, you hated school until you were, and you go into this thing of exchanging things. Oh, your Mars is in Aries, so's mine. Zoom, zoom. We have recognition. And then as time goes on, we look at that person and you go, that thing that I really love about you, that thing that I always say that you kind of do this. Well, you do it on the wrong side. If you did this, that would be a lot better. We put up with things that at first we're enamored with, and then they make us, what's the technical word? Fucking crazy. So the thing, though, is that what happens is that we begin to see that they're wearing their Venus or Jupiter or family tradition, not mine. And so we have these expectations that we build up around how until we go, if you stood this way, that would be better, and put that arm down, and then we're walking down the street like this, and we don't even know it, but we've become crippled and blocked. Anyhow, breaking up is hard to do. Okay, so what this is really about is how Saturn, which is the end of the road, is really just the beginning of the road going to Pluto, which is transformation. That first first breakup, heartbreak, not necessarily a romantic love, although it certainly can happen at age 7 or 9 or 15 or 32, but it is also a feeling of abandonment from a parent or being scolded in front of people by a teacher. That first time, that's like something happens. I think of William Blake, who wrote, he wanted as his epitaph, William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. So the end, though, is the beginning. That the relationship between Saturn and Pluto is important because Saturn isn't the end. It's the end of what we thought was the limitation, and it's the beginning of the transmutation and growth that happens as we move through that Plutonic realm. So astrology offers a map. And we need to understand in astrology that all the planets, all the archetypes, and therefore all the connecting archetypes that we would make in a relationship are multivalent. What does that mean? It means that there's an infinite or more than one way for them to hook up, double entendre kind of almost intended, but to hook up or to connect up with something else. In other words, we could take Mars and you could have one person who's really into Mars who is a serial killer or is a career professional military person. And you could have another person who's expressing their Mars, like the Dalai Lama, who's a warrior for peace and love. So we have to be careful about making assumptions based upon our expectations when it comes to how planets, either in a natal chart or interacting with someone else, may or may not work. Because if you think you know, you don't. And I would say that to me too, and often too. But astrology becomes a map of what Jung called the individuation process. And with astrology, we can make maps in a relationship, any relationship, of the dynamic interaction between the two or more, but two we're talking about today, people in that relationship. And it doesn't tell us anything about the momentary, no, it doesn't tell us anything about the level of dynamic that you have with that person, whether it's friend, lover, parental, sexual, violent. I mean, it doesn't tell us anything. It just tells us how that energy flows or doesn't. It shows what I call the flow and the blockage. And I should caution all of us as astrologers or as astrology students not to confuse the map with reality. I am not a moon in Cancer. I was born with moon in Cancer in this body. We are not our charts. The charts are a map, and they're damn good maps, but they're not the only map. All right. So in relationships, what astrology can't do is that it can't predict the success of a relationship. I can't tell you how many charts I and other astrologers that I know have looked at a relationship and said, yeah, it'll last the weekend, that's it, you guys are done, and 40 years later, they're still engaged and happy. And I've also seen charts of like, my astrologer said this person is absolutely amazing for me, and 3 months, a year down the road, 3 years down the road, it was not. So astrology in itself cannot predict the success of a relationship. However, we incorrectly often gauge success of a relationship on its longevity. Now, don't get me wrong, I do have a Cancer moon, and I see nothing, not only nothing wrong, there's something sweet, nostalgic, and enviable of the friend of mine who they knew each other in 8th grade when I knew them, and now 55 years, 60 years later, they are still married and as in love as they were when they were just playing on the playground at when they were teenagers or kids. However, longevity doesn't mean success, because I also know people who have been together for 40 years who should have just called it a good month. And we all do. I mean, and again, I'm not judging one way or another. I'm just saying, I'm asking the question, what makes a successful relationship? And although we can astrologically look at a chart and make guesses as to a chart that's going through trouble when it might end, Saturn conjuncting your natal moon or something of that sort, that's a bad thing to do because it feeds an idea into the unconscious which doesn't pay any attention to what's going on in the moment. It just resonates it. And then as time goes on, it begins to build a case of why we should break up to conform to that Saturn conjunction to the moon, and it's all over. And someone could say, well, that's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. No, it's like giving a homeopathic remedy. If you say something that's close and the imagery is right on enough, it'll resonate and manifest. So we need to be careful as astrologers. Also, astrology cannot replace therapy to mend a relationship in trouble. A relationship in trouble can be the most awesome relationship in the world, and it can be a relationship that on the other side of that trouble can be magnificent. But it's not going to be cured by a visit to an astrologer. It's going to be cured by the individuals doing the hard work of the going deep and doing that shadow work. All right. I'm going to kind of get over these. Yeah, I said most of these. Okay. Astrology can, however, help put those troubled spots into perspective and give us language to talk about what it is that we're going through. We are not in control of our relationships because we are not in control of ourselves. You know, Bruce Lipton says that somewhere around 90% of the brain happens in realms that we have no idea about. They're unconscious. Also, we're not going to ever fix someone else. It won't happen. We can't change someone else's chart. We can only change how we respond to them. So, yeah, I want to breeze over a few of these things. Time again is, what time did we say we're done? 5:30, and we're at, okay. Fate versus free will. This is a much larger discussion. I'm just going to say it's an important discussion, and that I saw this Lama Rinpoche many years ago, who was actually a British man who went off in the caves of Bhutan for 20 years and had a real Vajrayana lineage. I mean, he was a real McCoy in an Oxford-trained Western body. And anyone who's listened to lamas on the circuit know that their translators often don't speak a whole lot better English than they do. And it's sometimes very difficult to get the nuance. This guy was brilliant because he spoke English. And someone asked him, what about fate versus free will? And he said this. He said, imagine you're walking down the street and it's a beautiful day, you're whistling, everything's cool, and you see these two guys up on the third story of a building off to your left, and it looks like they're laying bricks on the top of the building, doing some brickwork, and as you're walking along, it looks like they're laughing and having a great time too. It's just that kind of day, and one of them knocks a brick over, and as you're stepping forward, it lands on your foot and breaks it. You're in pain. And you look up, and they don't even know they did it. And you look up and you yell at them, hey, you guys, be careful. Don't, and he's hurting. And the guys, because of the angle, they don't even see him. And so he stands back to get a better angle, and they still don't. And he takes about 10 steps back out into the road, and this truck comes down the road and kills him. Fate or free will? The Rinpoche's answer is the brick falling on your foot was an act of fate. Your death was an act of free will. We can't change what happens to us, but we can change how we react to it or how we respond to it, because often it's increasing the amount of time between the reaction and the response. We can react with anger and then process it very quickly and maybe doing something else with it. And it's about awareness again. It's using astrology to change our awareness. All right, I want to say a quick thing about how astrology can influence and improve relationships, because with astrology we get to change the frame of reference. We get to take our own injured ego out of an argument and see what the dynamic is. And this is very powerful because we can come to a place of cooperation rather than competition. And again, using that Saturn moon illustration I used before, often the moon person, if let's say your Saturn is on my wimpy, sensitive, loving Cancer moon, and your Saturn on my moon makes me always feel like you're on my case. Now, I can, from an egoic standpoint, every time you exhibit behavior like that, I can go into this hyper defensive mode or whatever. That's the competition, making myself right, making myself better. Or I can go into some sort of mode of cooperation, trying to listen to what you're saying, engage it, and go from there. Now, I'm not saying one should never establish boundaries. I'm just saying that these are the two extremes. So we can learn, though, by seeing our behavior and learning the repetitive patterns and becoming aware of them. There's this woman who wrote this thing called, Portia Nelson, who wrote this thing called Autobiography in 5 chapters. Does anyone know this? I'm going to read you the entire book. It's 5 chapters, and it'll take less time than my little prologue. Chapter 1 is I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm hopeless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's the deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. But my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. Can you see the relevance of this? I mean, in relationships in particular, where most of us have been in relationships. And again, I'm not just talking romantic relationships. I'm talking about the multiplicity of relationships that we're in. Most of us have patterns that we forget that it is our fault. I'm not saying that everything that happens to you is your fault. Again, careful treading on, on sensitive ground there. But I'm saying that repetitive patterns we need to look at, because we can learn to avoid them, even beyond getting out of them quickly. We can learn to avoid them, and then we can learn to live a life where we don't even see those traps anymore, and we can't fall into the hole if we don't see it, if it's not there, if we're on a different street. So Carolyn Mace, people know Carolyn Mace's work, wrote A Betrayal Experience. I was talking a little bit about this without using those words when I talked about the death, Pluto, the end of a relationship. A betrayal experience is necessary in order to let go of the tribal mind and individuate. An interesting concept. All right, now I want to come full circle back to where we started and what ostensibly this talk is about, and it is, even though we've traveled over a bit of territory. I want to come back to Venus and Mars and the difference between them. Husband's sitting there reading a book and the wife saying, I'm going into another dimension. You need anything? I'm going to breeze through this pretty quickly. For those of you who are interested in this, I have a lot of work online. You can find the current course that I'm teaching through Astrology Hub, which is called Foundations Level 3. You don't have to take levels 1 or 2. It's called The Magic of Harmonic Aspects. In this, we delve a whole lot into one entire lesson on Venus, because Venus, astrologically, is the source of what the medieval artists and philosophers, the early Renaissance. I'm talking Leonardo da Vinci, I'm talking Michelangelo, I'm talking Albrecht Dürer, I'm talking the painter Sandro Botticelli. These guys, and yes, I know they were all guys, which is an important thing, and I'm not going down that rabbit hole either. But these guys were wondering, is there something out there that is inherently beautiful, or is beauty always a function of our values or personal tastes overlaid onto reality? And their conclusion was that beauty exists. Venus actually is, we may paint her differently, but Venus exists independent of our consciousness, which is a crazy thing, And it turns out that the ratio of Venus to the Earth, Venus takes 224, actually the new NASA number is 224.7 days, Earth days, to go around the sun once. Earth takes 325 and a little bit less than a quarter. It's actually 365 rather, sorry. 365.24 days. That's why we need a leap second every century. I don't need it, but someone does. When you divide 365 and a quarter by 224 and a half, you come up to 1.62. For anyone who's an artist or has delved into this, you know that that is rounded off the golden mean, the divine proportion, phi, the ratio that Kepler wrote that God uses to create like from like, a ratio that defines the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy, the spirals on a sunflower seed, the number of petals on a chrysanthemum or a daisy. These are the numbers that are called the Fibonacci number series. I mean, this is an hour lecture unto itself that you can find online. I'm just making the point that the five-pointed star is the origin of this golden mean or divine proportion, and that Venus makes 5 conjunctions with Earth every 8 years from the sun's point of view, making in the heavens a 5-pointed star. Each of those conjunctions is about 72 degrees apart, and that Venus is the golden mean or this magical number to Earth, which is why Venus is related to beauty. That this is the golden mean and the divine proportion. That is this number 1.6180339 ... It goes forever. And the Fibonacci number series, which I'm not going to go into right here, basically the short version is any number on this series, pick 34, is the sum of the previous two numbers, 13 plus 21 equals 34, 55 plus 89 equals 144, so on. But any one of those numbers divided by the number before it gets closer and closer and closer and closer to this number that never can be expressed fully, which is that 1.6180339 ... That's the Fibonacci number series. And that Venus is related to quintiles in astrology, which most astrologers don't use. This is so important in relationships because there's a whole aspect of astrology that was written by guys for guys. I mean, it's what we refer to as the patriarchy, but we don't ever think about it on this level, that when astrologers wrote this shit down, they didn't give a shit about you lovely women who are here, or you lovely people who have feminine energies in you. I don't care what sex organs you have, it doesn't matter. But they didn't give a shit about that because they were all Marsy guys. And so the quintiles, the 1/5 of a circle, which doesn't fall into normal astrology, is incredibly important in understanding the powerful dynamics of a relationship, but they're not on the surface. They're more the soul connections. They're the intuitive. They're the magical connections. And again, I can't go down that further, but the current course, which it's 6 weeks long, 4 weeks of 4 lessons a week, but it's all pre-recorded. Then there'll be 2 live Zoom classes at the end, a week apart. And if you're interested, you can find anything online that my name is on these days. We'll have a link in my Instagram or whatever. But it's astrologyhub.com/F3 for Foundations Level 3. I don't want to say any more, and it's not even a sales pitch. I'm just saying that this stuff goes a lot deeper than we can touch on today, but it's so important to understand the dynamic between Venus and Mars. In fact, we don't normally think of metals being related to the planets, but they are. The ancients knew that the sun was related to gold, moon, silver, Mercury, and so on. But the important things here are that copper was related to Venus and iron to Mars. Interestingly enough, that these are fascinating, and there's this wonderful book which is called The Metal Planet Relationship. I don't even know if this book is still in print. But, copper for the ancient Greeks and Romans was mined off the island of Cyprus. Cyprus, cuprous, copper, copper, Cyprus, Cyprus is copper. And the Greek mythology is that Venus was born out of the waves washing up on the shore of Cyprus from Saturn's sperm that he dispensed into the ocean. I don't know how to say that right. Yeah, but you get the picture, or hopefully you don't get the picture. But the island of Cyprus is copper. It's where the Romans and the Greeks got copper from. Venus. By the way, copper is the only element in the human body that goes up and down by orders of magnitude according to a woman's menstrual cycle. And in fact, it's the copper coil that is used or has been used as a birth control method, because copper in its right place and right form can be very poisonous. Copper sulfate is what you use to kill the bacteria in a swimming pool. But without it, there's no fertility. So copper is an interesting thing related to Venus. It's also pliable, and you can't use it for war because it's too pliable. It's wonderful for art, for things of beauty. However, if you melt copper with tin, which is a metal of Jupiter, it creates an alloy, bronze, which is hard as steel. And so the Bronze Age began when the ancients began melting copper and tin. The problem is it's a metal of Jupiter, and the Romans couldn't get tin nearby. They had to go into England to get tin, which is why Rome conquered so much of Europe and made roads to England, was to get this thing from far away, Jupiter, tin, to come. Anyhow. So the story is, though, that iron is bipolar. What I mean by that, it's magnetic. It has a north and south charge. Copper conducts electricity. It's maybe one of the best conductors of electricity there is, but it does not have a polarity. Copper is not bipolar. Mars, like a protein in the body, has a pole. With Mars, it's a positive, negative, attractive and repulsive side to it. With protein, there's a hydrophilic and hydrophobic side of a protein molecule, where it's either attracted to or repulsed by water, which is why protein tends to make structures that circle around and close that make cells. It's way more than that, but here's the crazy thing. Women's body tends to have more copper and less iron than men's bodies, and that women's bodies tend to have more fat tissue in ratio to their body than men, who tend to have more muscle mass. Muscle is protein. And this idea that there is a biological difference between Venus and Mars is important, but it's also something that carries with it another whole weight of things that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But the astrological Venus is about attraction. It's about desire. And the astrological Mars is about creating the structure to get that desire. In other words, Venus is what you like and Mars is how you get it. Venus is the idea of feeling that magic of love, and Mars is the physicality of being engaged sexually in a way that is intense. That's Mars is the physical. Venus can be physical, but it's the sweet touch part of it. So Venus is attraction, beauty, desire, and Venus in a natal chart will show how you love your partner, what you're attracted to in others. This is really important. We're going to cycle back to that in a moment. Mars, on the other hand, is physical, hot, and combative, and it's really, how do I energize my partner? How do I engage physically, and how do I express myself physically? This, written by an astrologer, researcher in Britain, wrote, on average, women have about 20% higher copper serum than men, and for iron, it's the other way around, with men having 1/3 higher iron level than women in their blood. Iron and copper levels are sex-linked in exactly the way expected from gender symbolism of the planets. Now, it's important to say that generalized statistics do not reflect individual statistics. And let's just leave it at that for right now. Okay, I'm going to skip through some of this. We don't need this. This is all I want to get here. So, people heard of John Gray? Built an empire on men are from Mars and women are from Venus. He's a PhD psychologist. Grew up in Houston, Texas, and you know what his mother did for his entire childhood? She ran the astrological bookstore in Houston. She was an astrologer and ran the astrology bookstore. And he got the Venus-Mars thing correct. However, he, the techno word, he fucked up. And how he screwed up is this, because he built this empire on women are from Venus, and Venus is not Mars, but Venus needs to understand that Mars goes out and spends the day hunting, and when they come home, just give them a beer and turn on the TV. That's what Mars wants. Doesn't want to hear about your problems and your troubles and all that shit. Meanwhile, John Gray will tell the Mars, the men, that, there you are, you've been out all day. When you come home, just listen to your, I heard recently that someone had written to some doctor that, there were all these drugs for male sexuality, and how come there's, that allow, males to perform in ways they never knew about and blah, 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 blah. How come there's no drug for women, to be more interested in sex? And the doctor said, oh, yeah, no, there is. It's available. It's called listening. Anyhow, this idea that Venus and Mars, John Gray's idea is that to have a successful relationship, if you're a male, you need to just buy your Venus unit flowers because she loves flowers. And I saw John Gray lecture at a small fundraiser once for Bastyr University, and there were maybe about 150 people in the room, and we were at tables of 8. And John Gray was the lecturer, or the program that day, and he comes up to the podium, and he goes, where are the roses? I was supposed to have a dozen roses here. And boom, someone appears, and there's a dozen long stem roses. He goes, okay, now I can start. And he looks out, and he goes, guys, buy the women in your life roses. Don't ask why. It's not your problem. They just need that because it's about beauty that they perceive. Buy them roses, and that'll help you get what you want out of the relationship. And I said at my table, and someone that I have a friend here in the audience, someone whose first name is Peggy, and you know who that is, said, I said in telling this story afterwards, I said the following thing loud enough so everyone at the table could hear, but no one else could. And she said, yeah, other people could. And what I said was, what an asshole. He should buy himself roses every week until he figures out what he's missing. Okay, this is the key to where I'm going with this Beyond Venus and Mars piece. In fact, John Gray's whole philosophy has a lot of animosity in the real world, although I know people who say they went to John Gray workshops, they read his books, it saved their marriage. That marriage, and I get it, and for some people, if it works, bless you, on with it. Just don't hurt anyone else in the process. But that process of John Gray is based upon suppression, repression, and projection, because it's the male not experiencing his own Venus. And in ancient astrology, if you looked at a woman's chart, you'd look at the sun and Mars to see what kind of guy she should be with, or what kind of man should own her. Let's say it like it was. I mean, and so I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. But there was a great site called The Rebuttal from Uranus. I don't even know if it's still around. And basically, it was someone with a PhD in psychology who said, "Dear Dr. Gray," and she basically unloaded the bullshit of his perception and how it was hurting people and preventing them from being in real relationships because they were basically in relationships with their shadow that wasn't helping them deal with their issues. It was just encouraging their projection. So we come to the issue of gender issues in relationships. And these are not new issues. They're just new in the proportion of people that are experiencing them and or experiencing them out loud. There's been research done on both ends of that possibility. But all I'm saying is that the role historically in the Western culture from which we arrive is that a relationship between a man and a female, between a man and a woman, was a business relationship based upon a financial transaction that we call dowry. And it was basically the parents of a woman paying a man's family to take her. That's basically the deal. And a woman, until the 1950s or even early 60s, even in the United States, couldn't get a hotel room without a husband's permission. You couldn't get a credit card when credit cards first came out if you were a woman. If there are any women here who are, a little my age or a little older, they know that. But the point here is that relationships used to be a matter of ownership. That woman was property owned by her parents, father, not her parents, because her mother didn't have ownership rights, until she was married, and then she was owned by her husband. And if she wasn't married, she was basically an outcast in society. She was either a nun or a prostitute or just an old witch, Anyhow, the traditional masculine planets are the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The traditional feminine planets are the Moon and Venus. Whoops, we already have a balance of inequality there. Then we go to the transpersonal planets, and many modern astrologers fully grasp the fact that Pluto and Neptune are feminine energies, even though the Greeks had them as masculine deities. I mean, Neptune is the ocean that absorbs us all. It's like where we come from and where we go to. It's the ultimate matrix. And Pluto, is this again this place of depth in which we transform. We go in one way, we come out another. Don't want to say a whole lot about that. But, and this is basically, the thing I need to put, my point here is that culturally, men were encouraged to express their Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the masculine planets. And they were told not to wear pink, not to play with dolls, not to cook, not to clean, not to wash, because that's woman's work. And a woman was taught, don't touch that blowtorch. Get a guy and do it, I have a fond admiration for women with blowtorches. What can I say? I'm an Aries. Okay, no, but here's the thing, that remember, what we suppress, we project. What we repress, we project. And so what happens is we lived in a culture where we looked for our other half, because half of us didn't have a sun and a Mars, and the other half of us didn't have a Venus and a moon. We weren't allowed to go there, so we went out and we hired one. We married him or her, and that way we were complete. Even in Hindu astrology, the marriage chart is called a completion chart. The way to have a successful relationship is not based upon projection and of suppression and repression. It's based upon figuring out what you need to do to honor and respect all the planets in your chart, regardless of what your gender is or what their alleged gender is, and then go out and find a human being, regardless of what gender they are, and have a relationship between equals. And if you're in the same gender, great. If you're not, great. No one's fucking business but your own. Sorry, I was on a rant. I'm going to come back down. All right. I don't need the applause. We're all there. This isn't my thing. It's all of our things. Anyhow, in relationship work, there's a few things that we do, and there's basically two astrological tools that are used. The most common is synastry, which is having two charts. You and I are in a relationship. What do the planets in my chart do to the planets in your chart? And you actually take your chart and put my planets around it and go, which ones line up, which ones are harmonized, which ones are not? What houses do my planets fall in your chart? What do I do to you? Which is not the same as if I put my chart in the center and put your planets on my chart. What do your planets do to me? Let's go back to that moon Saturn. If my moon is lined up with your Saturn, that means your Saturn is always on my moon being parental, let's say. And that's not the only way for it to play out. But, making me work. On the other hand, if you're the Saturn person and my moon is on your Saturn, I might be the person who's always trying to soften the structures in your life that work for you. So we have to be careful to understand that the relationship that I am in with you is not the same relationship that you are in with me. They're very different relationships, even if we share it. Now then we can create another tool in astrology, which is called the composite chart. And I take your sun and my sun and find the halfway point. I take your moon and my moon and I find the halfway point. And I make an entirely new chart, which doesn't really exist in reality, but it's the halfway points between all of our various planets. And that planet shows where our energies meet. It shows no longer you or me. It shows the hum of the relationship itself. And so those are two very different things, because there are people who have very difficult harmonics, very different difficult aspects between their charts, and yet somehow when they get together, everything just seems to work. There are other people who have absolutely beautiful aspects between their charts, but when they get together, just things are harder. So that's that. Yeah, I'm not going to go through what each planet does here. How much time do we have? Okay. I'm not going to go through these individually here, but let me say this. I have business cards here. I'll put them down on the front of the stage. My business card has my email on it. If you want the PowerPoint of the PDF version of the PowerPoint of all of these, just send me an email and reference this lecture, and I will send you that so you have all these slides. Because this has, like for example, if your Jupiter lines up with a planet in my chart, your Jupiter is how you bring growth to me. We can take any planet, and these are just simplifications of a complex archetype, but every planet has a particular relationship. It's not just about Venus and Mars. It's about the relationship between every planet in your chart and every planet in my chart. Okay, we're skipping this. Getting rid of a problematic partner does not get rid of the problem. And I'm as guilty as any one of you are here, until one day I woke up and realized, damn, what the hell do these people have in common that are just always screwing me up? Oh, it's me. That's what they have in common. Deal with it. Rick's tips for successful relationship analysis. And this is not for a successful relationship, because I've been in more than my fair share, and many of them have been magical and beautiful. But what makes them successful? I don't have a clue. But I know how to analyze them. Number one, don't jump to conclusions. There are no such thing as good aspects or bad aspects. You can look at a chart with what you consider to be the worst aspects, and it might be the most awesome relationship ever. You don't know. This is as an astrologer. 2, consider positive and negative potential for each factor, regardless of whether you think it is good or bad. 3, imagine ways in which you could turn negatives into positives and share those. 4, remember, these are only maps. They don't tell you where you're going any more of a map of California telling you that you're going to San Francisco. The map is just the lay of the land. You need to figure out where you're going, not the map. And then William Blake's wonderful quatrain, he who binds himself to a joy does the winged life destroy, but he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. I want to skip through a bunch of here, and I want to share with you, some of you know that if I didn't have to make a living being an astrologer, I would just read and write poetry. And this is a poem that I wrote many years ago, but it's one that holds its weight. Trust me, I would not share with you the ones that I've written that do not. Okay, and it's called Network, and it goes like this. A net of dreams thrown at random into the darkness. A song from the heart sung on the celestial harp into the deepest silence. Hopes of a bright future, dreams of perfect love, anticipation of endless peace. My net comes back, filled with my illusions as if they are you. But my dreams are mine, as your perceptions are yours alone. Meanwhile, we dance, we fish together, and we both fill the silence with our song. Now we're skipping a whole bunch about illusion. Well, let me go back. I think I have a couple minutes. Venus has an affinity with Neptune, an outer planet that was only discovered in the 19th century. And Neptune is about imagination and dreams and fantasy, and it's Venus and Neptune together that make romanticism. In fact, the age of the Romantics is not just love, it's having more going on in your mind than going on out there. That's what Romanticism really is. And that William Blake wrote, what is now proved was once only imagined. The importance of imagination. My buddy Caroline Casey, and if you don't know Caroline's work, Google her, look her up. She has a lot of stuff online. When she talks, she talks like John Coltrane plays the saxophone. She's just a delight to listen to. She says, imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. I say that astrologically is that Neptune creates the dream upon which we have scaffolding that helps Saturn build the reality. So illusions are not unreal. In fact, I had an old college buddy who's actually the discoverer and founder and producer of the first Clash album, London Calling, and he was also the lyricist for the first 5 or 6 albums of the Blue Oyster Cult. Brilliant guy. And his name was Sandy Pearlman. He passed away a few years ago. And he used to say, back in college days, this line that still sticks in my head. You know, he wrote a lot of poetry that became lyrics to their songs. And the line that he used to say always was, imaginary but not unreal. Freud's interpretation of dreams. Love is the child of illusion and the parent of disillusion. To be disillusioned is one of the best things in the world. It sucks feeling it. But what it means is that the illusion has become real. And it's no longer an illusion. You know, which would you rather do? Live in a life of illusion or be disillusioned and live in reality? Reality is never quite as beautiful, or most often not quite as beautiful as the dream, the illusion, but it's certainly, this is Saturn's job, is to precipitate the dreams and illusions of Neptune into the three-dimensional world. So I'm just talking a little bit here about the relationship between Neptune and Venus, and Neptune as the great attractor for love because it creates the illusion of perfection and again its association with the golden mean, divine proportion also. Love can be confusing. Great word, confusion. You know what it means? It means melting together. Con with fusion, together. Ego don't like that shit. Ego says, I need to survive. That's the ego's job. And therefore, if I can't figure out what the boundary is between me and you, ego says, I'm screwed, I'm done, what do? I'm confused. Most spiritual paths begin with either something difficult that happens, a loss, a breakup, or abandonment, as Carolyn May said, or with confusion. And I want to close with this song that I think is probably the best song that I know that touches the place where Venus and Neptune meet. And it's a song by, he's not a Nobel laureate like Bob Dylan, but he's the only person that Bob Dylan liked enough to write a few songs with, and his name's Robert Hunter. Do people know Robert Hunter? Has anyone ever heard of the band The Grateful Dead? Robert Hunter wrote 90% of their songs through 45 years of recording. I mean, if you know the Grateful Dead and you know Trucking or Ripple or Friend of the Devil or you can name whatever your favorite song or songs are, Robert Hunter wrote the lyrics to all of them. Brilliant lyricist. And he wrote the lyrics to this song, and it's just going to take me a moment here to load it up. So just, and how come I don't have a mouse? Come on. Hang on one second. We will get there. And is there a reason? Do I have a mouse on this machine? Where's my tech help? Oh, well, that's not good. Thank you. Okay, what I need to do is I need to get back to the desktop, and I don't see a mouse here. All right.
It's somewhere on here. Try hitting.
Is this a touch screen or no?
No. Dude,
All right, let's do.
that's pretty insane.
All right, hold on one second. We can do this. We can do this. Okay, and we can do that. We still don't have a mouse though. Oh. Well, right now this is just a desktop, isn't it?
Over here.
All right, bear with me here a second because this will be worth it as soon as we figure it out.
Song, right?
I want to play that song. Okay, no, I know how to do it. Hold on. It's a good thing I'm a bit geeky. Desktop, quick access. We want to go down here, here. Where did desktop go? There. And now here. And here. And whew.
Pages are my days. In the secret space of dreams, where I dream amazed, when the secrets all are told, and the petals all unfold. When there was no dream of mine, you dreamed of me.
And anyone who knows the album now expects trucking to come ripping in. But thank you all, and I hope this wasn't what you expected, because I hate being, someone's expectations. By the way, just in closing, business cards here are on your way out at the door. If you want a copy of all the slides, send me an email and just reference this lecture. If you're interested in the Astrology Hub course, the first lesson is now been released. You'll get 4 lessons a week for the next 4 weeks. astrologyhub.com/F3 for Foundations 3. And I'm going to be on the panel tomorrow with a number of amazing astrologers, including David Palmer, who's quietly sitting there, being a good boy. And on Monday night, I'll be doing a talk on the astrology of 2023 and the rest of the decade, kind of a look ahead at the brave new world we're heading into. Thank you so much. Go out there, enjoy, be awesome, and thank you. Thank you all. And by the way, I do selfies with you if you'd like, but you have to promise me you'll send me a copy. Otherwise, the deal's off. Then I'm gonna put the business cards just down here on the ground.